For those of you that will be taking pharmacology or physiology as a course, this video is for you. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the physiological mechanism of coughing. This is supposed to be an example. When we said cough, it's simply a complex physiological response that involves the coordinated action of multiple neurons, muscles, and the respiratory component. The word neural here simply refers to the nervous system, which is like a super fast network in our body. The key part of this involves the brain, the nerves, and the neurons. The brain is simply the control center, the nerves is the messenger, and we have the neurons, which we call the transmitters. Notice that cough is a useful protective reflex that clears the respiratory tracts of accumulated mucus of foreign substances. The underlying keyword here, which I call, is the reflex. When we said reflex, it's simply an automatic and instant response to a stimuli. It can either be automatic, instant, or unconscious. Other example of this reflex can be physiological reflex, protective reflex, and we have the withdrawal reflex. The word physiological reflex, this simply refers to, we can give an example with digestion. But before then, when we said automatic, this literally happened without the thinking. And when we said instant, it occurs like quickly without a delay. What about the unconscious? Unconscious happen when you don't decide to react, but your body does. So, some example, we said we have the physiological, protective, and we have the withdrawal. The physiological, we can give an example with things like digestion and the heartbeat. And protective reflex example, like coughing and sneezing. That is where this coughing falls under. Since we said it's a protective reflex. From the definition, briefly explanation which we gave, we said cough is a useful protective reflex that clears the respiratory tract of accumulated mucus or foreign substances. What about the last one, which is the withdrawal reflex? Example of this, like withdrawing something, like pulling your hand away from heat. And you need to understand that the coughing reflex is simply triggered by the stimulation of sensory receptors in some part of the body, like the trachea, the bronchi, the larynx, the pharynx, and the nasal cavity. Looking at some examples that triggers this coughing include some irritant and infection. And when we say irritant, this can either be dust, pollens, or smoke. An infection, it can either be as a result of virus or bacteria. And sometimes allergies, acid reflux, and foreign substances. We have talked about the neural component involved in coughing, which we call the superfast network that involve. And we talk about the reflex. We give different examples of reflex and the classification. Now let's look at, now let's look at the neural pathway. We'll talk about the neural component, we are going to look at the neural pathway this time around. So, when we say the coughing reflex involves the activation of pathways, the pathway is literally going to stand for the vagus nerve. Another name for vagus nerve is what we call the vagal nerve, then the brain, and then the spinal cord. How does this vagus nerve looks like? The vagus nerve, which we also call it the vagal nerve, this is the main nerve of parasympathetic nervous system. It is originated in the brain stem, but specifically this portion which we call the medulla. It exits the skull, meaning that it comes out of the skull through the jugular foramen, and it descends itself through the neck parallel to the carotid arteries. The vagus nerve actually passes through the thoracic cavity, which is the chest, and it enters down into the abdominal cavity. Key areas innervated of this vagus nerve are the throat, larynx, heart, lungs, stomach, intestine, and abdominal organs. And remember, we said the vagus nerve play a crucial role in various bodily function. Such bodily function include, we have things like the swallowing, speech, heart rate, breathing, digestion, and coughing. Coughing, which is our main topic of discussion today. So I have some important muscles involved in contraction for all to have a cough sound. Example of those muscles are the diaphragm. So previously I made a video on the diaphragm, which we call it the whole organ that lies behind the stomach, and it is responsible for like 73 to 75% of our breathing. I'm also going to drop the link down in the description section in case you might have an interest. So, example of such muscular component involved in the contraction, we have the diaphragm, intercostal muscles, abdominal muscles. Here is supposed to be muscle. Abdominal muscles, and we have the pelvic floor muscles. At this point, we have defined what is coughing. We have talked about the reflex, the type of reflex, and we also talk about the irritant that triggers the coughing. And we also talk about the neural pathways from the vagus nerve, the brain, and the spinal cord. We also talk about some muscles component in the contraction. We give an example with the diaphragm, intercostal muscles, and we also look at the key areas innervated, that is of the vagus nerve. So the only thing we're going to be left with is looking at the step-by-step, the physiological aspect, how we can combine everything together and get the coughing done. Dived in, there are some important receptors which we need to talk about, which they goes by the name, let's say this is receptors. There are two different receptors. The first one with the red, let's call it mechanoreceptors. Mechanoreceptors. And the second one, chemoreceptors. So what are mechanoreceptors and chemoreceptors, and what is their role in coughing? So first of all, starting with the first one, which is mechanoreceptors, what it does simply, it detects physical changes of movement in the airways. And this also triggers what we call, it also triggers coughing, or cough reflex actually. Then the chemoreceptors, what it does, it simply detect chemical changes in the airways. And other things it does, the chemoreceptors, it detects oxygen level, and it also triggers cough reflex. Let's begin. The thing that will happen for us to have a cough is simply detection of irritant in the airways. And this detectant can either be a dust or pollens. Chemoreceptors and mechanoreceptors are two agents responsible for that detection, and they are found throughout the body. Specifically, like mechanoreceptors can be found in places like the airways lining, the lungs tissues, nasal passage, sinuses, larynx, which we call the voice box, and we have the pharynx, which is the throat. Notice here I've placed those receptors, both the mechanoreceptors and the chemoreceptors. Here we have what we have. Let's take an example of this. What we have in red should be the mechanoreceptors, and the green one should be the chemoreceptors. We also have them in the airways, meaning that we have placed properly our mechanoreceptors and chemoreceptors. And if we trace back, we said, if we go back a little bit, we said, first of all, there would be a detection of irritant in the airways. By what? That's the first step. By a second step, that's the detection, right? When we have irritant, which we said it can be smoke, it can also be pollens or dust. So when there is this detection, what will detect it is the mechanoreceptors and then the chemoreceptors. What will happen next? If those receptors receive a signal or the introduction of pollens, dust, or smoke in the body, they are going to send a signal. Let's take an example with just two. They are going to coordinate and send either one or two of them. They are going to coordinate and send a signal into the vagus nerve. If you notice that even from the diagram, the vagus nerve is being connected with the brainstem, specifically the medulla. So the vagus nerve is going to take that straight and send a signal into the brain. Immediately it finds itself in the brainstem. What it does is simply process the signal trying to identify a cough stimulus. The next thing it does is to activate the cough center, which we call the nucleus ambiguous. So at this point, there will be signal transmission into the spinal cord. Center at this point have to send a signal into the spinal cord so that it can tell the spinal cord to get ready. We need to form a contraction of those muscles which we talked about previously so that we can have a cough. We have to send a signal into the diaphragm. This is what we call the diaphragm. Let's put just D. And it will also send another signal into the intercostal muscles in order to have a muscle contraction. When we have this muscle contraction, it's going to increase the pressure on the chest. So what happens at this point, intercostal muscles, they contract in order to expand the chest. And the moment they expand the chest, the glottis will open. Right? Sorry, the glottis will closes. And the moment it closes, it's going to build up a pressure. And the moment that glottis open, which is here, when it opens here, it's going to release an air, creating a sound, which is the cough. So this is it for this video. I hope you find it helpful. If you do, please don't forget to click on the subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. For those of you that will be taking from